Welcome to an Old Dirty Boston podcast rundown. ODB rundowns are short intros to important stories, topics, and people connected to the city of Boston. In this rundown, I'm talking about the Blackfriars Massacre. 5 men found dead in the basement of a downtown crossing bar. Cocaine, corrupt cops, and Boston's bloodiest unsolved mystery. This is the Old Dirty Boston podcast. I started this story after someone connected me with a guy who used to work at the Blackfriars tending bar. He told me over the phone that his brother-in-law worked for the DEA and told him that he should quit immediately. There was a lot of heat on Blackfriars owner, Vinny Salamonte, both from the DEA and on the street. Something bad's gonna happen in that place, and you don't want to be there when it does. 2 weeks later, in the early morning hours of June 28th, 1978, 5 men were murdered inside the Blackfriars bar at 105 Summer Street in Boston's downtown crossing. All 5 men had been shot at close range with either a shotgun or a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. The men were found hours later by a janitor. Known as the Blackfriars Massacre, no one was ever convicted of the killings. It's still unknown how many shooters were involved, what their true motive was behind the killings, and maybe most importantly, who gave the order for what was described by Boston Police Commissioner Joseph Jordan as a real wicked, vicious type of crime. It was a professional job. To illustrate how violent the murders were, one victim's fingers had been blown completely off. His arms were outstretched. He put them up to block the shotgun blast from his face. The bullets tore through his hands before entering his skull. Other victims were found with their scalps removed from their heads, again, from the blast of the shotgun at such a close range. First, let's start with what we know about the murders. We know the men were killed between the hours of 1:30 a.m. when the pub closed and 6 a.m. when the janitor came in for his shift. Police reports estimate the time of the murders at approximately 2 a.m. After closing, it was normal for the owner and some friends to hang out after hours, drinking, doing coke, and playing cards or backgammon. The shooters had forced all 5 men into the basement office of the bar before opening fire. This lends to the theory that there had to be at least 2, if not 3 shooters to be able to keep all of the men from putting up a fight before being shot inside the office. At the scene, the police found a small amount of cocaine, marijuana, and a number of guns, and $15,000 of cash in an open safe. This is where it gets confusing. It's commonly thought that the motive behind the Blackfriars murders was to steal 4 kilos of cocaine. But assume this was a robbery. Why would the killers leave behind $15,000 in cash? If you're desperate enough to murder 5 men over 4 kilos of coke, would you really want to leave behind $15,000 in cash? This leaves us a few possibilities. 1, this was not a robbery, and in fact, it was a hit put out by Boston's Patricia family mafia or Whitey Bulger's crew as a penalty for dealing drugs in Boston without an okay or the proper kickbacks. 2, word was out that the victims had the coke locked up in the office of Blackfriars. The killers, acting alone or on orders, had one goal: get the cocaine and leave no witnesses. If they were acting on orders to take those 4 kilos, that's what they did. 3, the killers may have seen more value in leaving behind the $15,000 in cash and allowing the police to think this was just a hit versus having the police out looking for them and the cocaine that they had just stolen. And this is why it's important to understand who the victims were. The Boston Globe reported that all of the victims were known criminals, with one exception, Jack Kelly, a Framingham man. He was 34 years old. He was the night manager of Blackfriars. Kelly had formerly been an investigative reporter for WHDH in Boston. He was now managing the bar in some ways out of desperation. According to friends, he was planning to start a new job as a freelance reporter for WLVI. That transition would come a few weeks too late. Kelly was always hanging around gangsters. He wasn't a known criminal, but friends said that he liked the allure of hanging around that crowd. Kelly described his relationship with members of organized crime like this: I suppose my role with these people is a dual role in a sense. I went into the relationship looking for stories. If you want a story about a gangster, you go to a cop. If you want a story about a cop, you go to a gangster. I went into that situation for that reason, and I suppose I came away with more. Yeah, he came away with a bullet in the head. As they say, you mess with the bull and you'll get the horns. Vinny Salamonte, owned the Blackfriars and a couple other bars in Boston. He had a reputation of dealing cocaine. Salamonte lived in an apartment in Quincy, and at the time of the murders was under investigation by both the FBI and IRS over a bankruptcy fraud in 1976. Salamonte was also friends with Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi. Flemmi's girlfriend had actually been hired to work as a waitress at the Blackfriars. Another one of the victims, Charles Margarian of North Andover, was 36. He was an insurance salesman by day and a well-known high-stakes backgammon player. Peter Maroth of Jamaica Plain was 34. He managed the Shepherd's Pub, another one of Salamonte's bars. He came to the Blackfriars that night after his shift. Freddie De La Vega of Somerville was also 34. Now let's look at the suspects. Less than a month after the killing on July 12th, the police arrested 2 men and charged them with the murders. These men were Robert Italiano of East Boston and William Lorardi, also known as Bad Billy, a known drug dealer from Lynn. Arraigned on multiple homicides, their trial lasted 27 days and ended with a not guilty verdict for both men. After the trial, there were a lot of rumors swirling in the streets. Vinny Salamonte had told friends he was getting a shipment of coke, so people knew he was sitting on a few keys at the time of the murders. They talked about who could have known and who was crazy enough to murder 5 men to steal it. The names that kept coming up were Stephen Flemmi, Whitey Bulger, and Nicholas Femia. Following the murders, Whitey Bulger reached out to John Connolly. Connolly was a corrupt FBI agent that helped Whitey play both sides of the lines for years. Connolly was convicted of racketeering and second-degree murder charges in 2002. He's currently in a Florida prison cell. Anyways, Whitey asked Connolly to get him copies of the photos taken by Boston PD at the scene of the Blackfriars murders. He takes those photos and he goes to see a real estate developer named Ted Barrison, who Bulger knew had borrowed $60,000 from Salamonte. Bulger told Barrison, "I killed Salamonte, and the money you owed him, now you owe it to me." To prove his point, Whitey then laid out the photos he got from the crime scene on top of Barrison's desk. Needless to say, he paid Whitey the $60,000. Next, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi. Flemmi had a girlfriend named Marilyn De Silva. She worked at the Blackfriars, and she was friendly with Salamonte, the owner, and Jack Kelly, the manager. The night of the murders, she told Flemmi she was going to go by the Blackfriars to pick something up. "Don't go there. Don't go to Blackfriars," he told her. Next up is Nicholas Femia, a 38-year-old, 240-pound Winter Hill associate with a known addiction to cocaine and a reputation for wielding a sawn-off shotgun. Femia was big, overweight, and wore flashy clothes. Femia is widely regarded as the man behind the Blackfriars murders and was under investigation by law enforcement for multiple crimes up until his death in 1983. Femia was shot and killed inside a body shop on Condor Street in East Boston, attempting to collect money for extortion. After Nicholas Femia had been killed, Stephen Flemmi reached out to John Connolly, the crooked FBI agent, and he told him that Femia was the one behind the robbery, that he pulled it off with Robert Italiano and Bad Billy Lorardi. Those are the men who were originally put on trial and acquitted. The question is, did Flemmi tell him this to take the heat off of himself and Whitey? Was he telling the truth? And he felt like there was no harm in telling Connolly after Nicholas Femia was already dead, because Italiano and Lorardi had already been tried and acquitted. Did any of them care that Salamonte and 4 of the men were dead? If Femia was behind the hit, I'm sure Whitey got a cut. And even if he didn't flinch at taking $60,000 off that real estate developer. In all honesty, who knows? The mystery and the misdirection of the Boston mob scene has left the Blackfriars Massacre unsolved for 40 years. This is the Old Dirty Boston Podcast.